The thing that's something that's been with me since this morning, right? Let's say around 5 in the morning when I got up, and I just ended up watching something with Bezos, and then this was the thing that was very catchy to me. What is not going to change in the next 5 to 10 years, Amitabh? What do you think is not going to change in at least the coming decade when it comes to our part of the planet?
So let me start with the work I do. And I, as a person, believe in an optimistic worldview.
Yeah.
So that's not a good question to start with, where you're saying what is not going to change. I really want the world to change. The world to change dramatically, where we are able to create a more equal world.
True.
But to be honest, we are obviously looking at a very difficult future. Starting from the climate catastrophe to the growing inequality to the massive challenges that we now see for democracy. So it is a turbulent time for you to ask me this question.
I'm tearing up because of the sunscreen that I have on. But obviously, the thing is, I try to stay as optimistic as I can, and I've been yelled at many times in my life that I'm too optimistic, and I try to stay as positive as I can, especially with the youth, that there is a future. There's a future here. That's something that I've been advocating for a long time. There's a future here itself.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm absolutely with you. And if somebody does not agree with you, the best is, and I'm a student of social science, it's good to zoom out and just ask them, what was the literacy rate in 1950, in 2000? You need to zoom out. Yes, the immediate problems look very enormous. But if you just look at a time span of 3-4 decades, you will see the difference. As in, you will not need to make them optimistic. They will become optimistic. The world changes. As in, just imagine that even in Europe, till the 1970s, not every country had women voting rights. Till the 1970s, as in, can you imagine that?
That's not long ago. That's not long ago.
Long ago. And now look at the world, as in, we're really talking of gender justice in a very different way. So things change. Let's zoom out. Let's look at a longer perspective. Our job is to be optimistic. And we need to contribute in shaping the new world.
Yeah. That's such a great way of putting it, and that's something that I'm going to actually start off with. One of the first things that I wanted to dive into was obviously the work that Oxfam has done. Just a gist of how your trip has been so far over a period of, let's say, a week, slightly more than a week.
Yeah, it's been more than a week. So I would say this is in two parts. The first few days were completely dedicated to the World Social Forum, and which was an absolutely fascinating experience. And the second part was working with Oxfam Nepal colleagues, trying to understand what's our work contributing to in Nepal. Took me to Kanchanpur, took me to villages in that area. So again, came back very inspired, not just by our work. I would say that that's secondary, but I must congratulate my colleagues here. It was the resilience of the people there.
Yeah. Beautifully put. Let's get started with Oxfam Nepal, and then I'll dive back into the forum. How was Kanchanpur? And share some stories right in the get-go. Once you got there.
So Kanchanpur was interesting for me. It's closer home. As an Indian, the language was easier for me to grasp there. But what I thought was, let me talk of two contrasting stories.
Sure.
One is how boundaries can divide people and create havoc with people's lives. We went to a village called Kutia Kabra, and this must be a full episode for you. Just the name itself, Kutia Kabra, I couldn't understand. As in, does it really mean what I'm hearing? And I was told that the actual story for the name of the village is that there was a dog buried there, and because of that, it's called Kutia Kabra. But the story of that village is that you have the river, some part tributary of Mahakali, completely cutting them off. And then you have the village, and then you have India. So for them to access their own mother country, they had no way. As in, they've got a bridge now, as in a small suspension bridge where only humans can pass. So they had to go to school, for hospital to India. So I just couldn't understand, why would we divide boundaries so oblivious to human suffering or human needs. So it was troubling for me, as in, I really don't believe in boundaries. Our job is to actually break down boundaries. Also, that's one. On the other hand, but that community has also been very resilient. They have really now been, and every year their village gets completely flooded. And they need to go to a safe house, so they've made the safe house. They've reached out to local politicians, got the bridge done. So it's a story of human resilience that, in spite all the odds, how they're still surviving. And then the second was a story of a woman who worked with one of the Oxfam initiatives with her partner needs, and gradually, as a fiery woman, when you speak to her, you'll realize that there's a leader there. And she gave us lunch. She had a small canteen, kind of a place for the people in that village. And she was talking of self-help groups. She was talking of savings. She was talking of road. And what really took my heart away, she said, this is an area where rafting is going to work.
Wow. That is a leader.
That is a leader. She's saying, get the rafting done here. It'll change our economy. And that was really the pitch from her to me. Look at her understanding that this man is coming from outside. No point talking about the road or a hand pump. She was saying, get the rafting industry started here. It'll change our life here. So, fiery woman, it's fascinating. I've met a lot of elected representatives, I must say, and these were all local governments. I really liked it because at least in my conversation with them, I could see a very strong rootedness in their communities. And that I thought was very positive.
And you think the policies are correct? Policies are working? The change is happening when it comes to local level government?
So, because I work on these issues, I'm very cautious commenting on it, because I do know that, these 2-3 days, it's so inadequate. It's really more of getting a feel of what's happening. So for me to comment on the local policies would not be fair. But what I can certainly say is that there's so much more to be done, as in poverty is still there. I could see, I met a whole neighborhood of former bonded laborers. Remarkable that the government ensured that they get freedom. But what is this freedom? Freedom is also about dignity. Have we been able to ensure a decent livelihood for them? Decent education for their children? So those are questions which confront us every day.
Constantly.
Yeah.
Constantly. It's something that reminds us there's so much work to be done, and it's never ending.
Absolutely.
It's never going to end.
No, let's be optimistic. We will create a just and equal world.
Amitabh, if you had to define poverty, how would you define it?
So, poverty is, at multiple levels. But what I often use is that we must have the conditions which ensure a life of dignity. So, if you have that those conditions which gives you a life of dignity, then I would say you're not poor. What is that life of dignity? Obviously, your very basic needs are met, from food to shelter to clothing, but also things which are often not seen as part of the dignity basket, so to speak. Access to education, access to health, access to energy, etc. So it is really about ensuring a minimum level a living standard where people can then, really get into the potential of what humans are supposed to do?
I'll get started from this saying, I was looking into a lot of things, and one thing that caught my eye, which I'm sure you've already realized, if there's something that catches my eye, write it down, or I just talk about it. Nobody should have $1 billion.
Oh, yes. Yes. Tell me, do you agree or not?
In a world where they're talking about somebody about to go ahead and have $1 trillion, yes. we're coming down to $1 billion, right? So personally, I don't think anybody should have $1 trillion. I don't even know how many zeros are there in $1 trillion. That's going to take care of a lot of things for a lot of people around the planet.
It's the same for billionaires. It's the same for billionaires, as in, yes, so our inequality report, which we released in Davos, does talk of, it does predict that within 10 years, we will have $1 trillion now.
We will, right?
We will. That's what the numbers tell us. And on the other hand, coming back to your question, I really believe that billionaires are a sign of policy failure, complete policy failure. Just imagine that, as in this world, and I feel both angry and upset that 900 million people, that's 90 crore people in the world, sleep hungry. They do not get 3 square meals a day. And then you have billionaires. So, I think, forget about the economic arguments. There are enough economic arguments. I think morally, it's untenable. Mm-hmm. It's morally obscene. So somebody sleeping hungry next to you, and I have 20 private yachts and
jets.
10 jets, and I'm just going for a birthday party across the continent from LA to New York. It's unacceptable. So
it's just insane. I have a funny data here somewhere that my team came out with, and I kind of want to just do that as soon as I find it. The data was talking about the amount of carbons that we go ahead and 1%. Oh, there you go. 1% of the rich versus give or take the 5 billion, right? So when it comes to polluting the planet, it's more carbon. 1% of the rich go ahead and produce more carbon. Well, they go ahead and completely destroy the planet more than anybody else.
So this is again from, thank you, Oxfam report. It is our report. We did this in 22, and then we have another report in 23. But it's worse. The top 1% are responsible for twice the carbon emissions of the bottom 50%. Twice the emissions.
This is slightly older report. It must be more.
Yes, yeah. So I'm happy you picked it, because what we've also been arguing is that economic inequality and the climate catastrophe that we are looking at are linked. So it's important to recognize that we've created an economic system which is essentially built on exploiting the natural resources, exploiting Mother Earth more and more, and where the eventual objective is not about an equal or a just world.
Yeah.
It is about more and more profits at the cost of anything. And that's something that now we're recognizing, as in the harm that we have done already to Mother Earth is a disaster.
One thing that I'll grab right now is when you were here early on, let's say 2 decades ago, less cars, less vehicles. Now, this time around, it takes you an hour to get anywhere, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, at the cost of being unpopular in Kathmandu, with the current generation, I must say that when I came here for the first time in 2001, it was a calmer city, much lesser vehicles, much lesser pollution. I really felt nice, relaxed. But now, again, the city is like any other metropolis, bustling with vehicles, sadly pollution. So, there is a question that we need to ask. As you know, I come from Delhi. That's home for me. there are increasingly studies saying that individuals would lose 7 to 8 years of their life just living in that city because of the pollution. Is that the cost that we want to pay for living in a metropolis?
7 to 8 years.
Yeah.
That's new. That was probably new for me. I was reading up about the amount of lung damage.
Yeah. So, but now there are reports which are saying it's 7 to 8 years.
7 to 8 years.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
It is. As in, why should I give up 8 years of my life and also an unhealthy existence for living in a metro? So there is a need for all of us to take a pause and really question the economic order that we have created.
Pandemic, let's say a few things. Pandemic, the rising cost of everything, inflation. I don't know how many wars we have right now. I just know of a few, at least one or two that are highlighted by the media across the globe. I'm sure there are many more.
Yeah.
Especially the pandemic and the inflation right now. How has that actually escalated the problems?
Yeah. So if you look at the data, it's since 2020. Again, our report, I would really urge you to have a look at the report. It says that the billionaires, the top 5 billionaires have doubled their wealth since 2020. This is the time when the billionaires have added $3 trillion to their wealth. And on the other hand, as I said, you have 800 million plus people sleeping hungry. There are, again, 800 to 900 million people whose wages have not been able to keep up with inflation. It's the same period. So what we've seen during the pandemic is that at the top level, people are actually making more profits, whereas the common people are becoming poorer. So this our headline this year was 5 billionaires doubled their wealth and 5 billion people have become poorer. That's 60% of the global population during this post-pandemic.
4 years, three
plus years.
3 plus years.
And so the economists are constantly saying this is really a K-shaped recovery. So the rich are getting
richer and the poor
are getting poorer. So that's what the pandemic did. And yes, the wars at this moment, it is making the world very unstable. First, I would really just express my solidarity with the people in Gaza. It's painful. What kind of a war are we waging in this world that you have more than 8,000 children dead? 8 children. And you have 25,000 people dead. I have 33 colleagues who live in Gaza. All of them have had to move houses. Every day we're connecting with them more for just to hear that they're safe. It's a painful story. So Gaza, but as you said, there was being waged across. So we really don't know what's happening. On the one hand, as somebody who works on issues of development, on people's rights, I think there's so much to be done to build a better future for all of us. And what we're really doing is destroying it in many, many ways.
One specific word that I'd like to go ahead and ask you and get your perspective on it. Taxes.
Yes, go ahead.
Is there a way out? Is there a solution so that everybody pays their fair share of taxes around the world?
Yes, absolutely. And fair share of taxes is something which is critical. We've talked of poverty. We talked of lack of, say, education or health. A lot of this has to do with the resources that the governments have. And what we're increasingly seeing, let me give you an interesting data. Even in the developed countries, the corporate tax has actually been halved since 1980s. And on the other hand, you're seeing public education system, public health system, safe drinking water being starved of resources.
Declining, yeah.
So taxes are central to the solutions that we have. And every dollar that you don't pay in taxes is actually one less nurse who could ensure a safe delivery. Every dollar that is not paid in taxes means a less school teacher who could ensure that our children get educated. So taxes, I would say, you're talking of fair share of taxes, but we believe that you also need more taxes. So certainly fair share of taxes, but also taxes on the super rich. So we need a wealth tax, an inheritance tax. It is really taxing the super rich. They'll probably not even know. But let me, you started with a billionaire, so let me give you another billionaire perspective.
Sure.
Warren Buffett, as you know, he's always been the top 5, 7 richest people in the world. He says that what a system that we've created, that my secretary pays more taxes than me. He's famously said this. So there is, again, the tax system needs a rehaul.
What is the reaction of let's say not just rich but super rich or ultra rich? I'm sure you've directly or indirectly met them.
Yeah.
What's their reaction when you're talking about it openly? Let's say in a place like the Economic Forum or in other forums around the globe.
So, as you would imagine, every position has different responses, but let me start with the positives.
Yes.
One, and you can obviously say that that's a selection bias. I do meet a lot of billionaires, and they do recognize that there has to be much greater taxation. and there are many of them who would be happy paying more taxes. But let me also say that it's not just bilateral conversations. We have a group called Patriotic Millionaires who've actually written publicly saying tax us more. So it was fascinating. I was in the World Economic Forum in January at Davos, and I met a group of millionaires who came and said, thank you, you're doing the right campaign, and they are also doing a campaign called Tax Us More. So people recognize that there is, at the moment, a flawed way of taxing the world, where the super rich get away by paying very little, and they have a much greater responsibility. But yes, you're right, there's some people who think that this is not the best of proposals.
When you see the greed,
Yeah.
I'm not going to take names, obviously. I'm not even going to use the amount of zeros people have, right? When you see the greed in people's eyes, let's say, let me just stick with eyes, how does it make you feel personally?
So, as I said, I feel very angry. It's not about just the individuals. As in, what makes me feel more angry is that as societies, we accept these levels of inequality.
Yeah.
As in, we'll always have bad eggs.
Yeah.
But it is about how can a society look away when there are people dying of hunger, and somebody, as I said, is flying in their private jets just for a birthday party. That's the question. So it is, and I feel surprised that how do we normalize these levels of inequality? Would we do this in a family? As in, I don't think, even in an extended family, as in your third cousin is also hungry, and would you still do it? Probably not. As in, you will not fly in your private jet. You'll ensure that at least there's basic food. How can we not get something as fundamental as this? Something as, it's a human instinct to at least ensure that your brothers and sisters around the world get the basic necessities of life.
I know that you're part of various think tanks, one to be specific. Have you had conversations with think tanks here in Nepal? And what's your thought process? I remember Shreya was picking up on that earlier in the morning when we earlier before we started the podcast. What's your thought process when it comes to here, and what she was also mentioning? I just picked up on that early on, even before I came down. What's your thought process on that? Like, how important are think tanks, and how important are the conversations that come out of think tanks? That's very, very valuable for policy making.
So I think think tanks are very critical. They are the space where you do independent thinking.
Yeah.
We should not be in a rush that whatever the think tank says gets translated into policy within 2 months or 3 months. It takes time, because very often think tanks are thinking of alternatives, which is not the set way of functioning. So, if you look at think tanks, they would be doing 2 or 3 broadly different pieces of work. Well, one is to actually analyze what's happening, how the policy is getting implemented. And they would have small tweaks as suggestions. That's something a lot of governments do actually pick. And that's worthwhile. But the second piece is to actually look at long-term policy frameworks. And that's not going to happen quickly. It takes time. But that's really the role of think tanks. And they'll do it. They will be persistently bringing out that research, facts, data analysis. They'll gradually win over new champions. Those champions have to be somebody from the bureaucracy, somebody from the political system, people like you who play a very important role from the media. Once you start recirculating those ideas, they become more central to the public sphere. And that's really the critical shift that happens, and that's important. But the third, I think, which is important, I love it, it's a romantic role of think tanks, which is of thinking of fundamentally different alternatives. So today, if you look at, say, in Europe, there's so many groups which are now talking of degrowth. We started from talking about Kathmandu, how it's become congested, but you would probably not hear people talking of degrowth. And I completely understand, because it's a different context here. But people are talking of degrowth, that you just cannot sustain this level of consumption in the world. And therefore, we'll need to reduce the growth that we work with. So, that's an alternative worldview. And it'll take time. So that's something very romantic, I would say, but it takes much longer. So think tanks are critical. Please invest in it, respect them, ensure their autonomy, that they're able to think freely. They'll help the country.
I'll give you a very different perspective. Might sound naive in this when I say this. Early on, when I was flying back home, I was at the lounge and I was just looking around. There were a lot of friends who I was just overhearing a conversation, and then there were a couple, and then one of the partner was like, "I want to go and check out XYZ luxury goods store," and that got me thinking. I was like, "Oh yeah, of course. Let me go ahead and check it out myself as well."
Yeah.
Any piece of item there was above a X amount of dollar figure, right? It's insane.
Yeah.
And when I entered that luxury store, apparently the next day I come back home and I was just going through social media. That's the number one store in the planet. The company is valued the most in the planet, bigger than anything else that we consume, anything else that we use on our daily lives. It's valued more than everything else. So again, when it comes to degrowth, the amount of consumption that we tend to go out and do on luxury,
yeah,
that's insane.
I agree.
I lost my mind.
Good, you lost your mind. You must ensure.
The question is why? Like, the question that I asked myself after I came back, and obviously found out that ABC company was one of the biggest in the planet when it comes to dollar figure. I was like, why? The question I asked myself was, what is so important that the marketing went so right, let's say, for that company, that we want to consume that product? And my question to myself was, why would we do that as human beings? But obviously, I'm sure you ask this every day.
I ask this every day. And I'm glad you're asking this question. And I hope you make many others feel that this is insane. That's really the point. That it is a mad rush towards consumerism. And that's something which we certainly need to address. Because, I don't want to make it a philosophical conversation. We can make it a philosophical conversation, as in you and I certainly would have our own philosophical underpinnings into how we look at the world. But there is a direct consequence on people of this mad rush. That's the point, where you can't look away. I was talking of hunger. What it essentially does, it's this economic system where you are not be willing to pay higher taxes, but invest in those luxury goods. And I can come back to the corporates, and maybe we should, because you've brought this up. Corporates are accumulating more and more wealth, and that is that wealth which could have been redistributed.
Is it being redistributed?
It should be. It's not. So no, thank you. Let me just, because that data is again very important. Can you imagine that the top largest corporations in the world, their net worth is more than, this is shocking. The net worth of the top 10 largest corporations is more than the combined GDP of every country in Africa, Latin America, and Caribbean.
The whole, let's say 2 continents and more.
Yeah, that's what it is. Just 10 corporations. And these are the continents where you have also hunger, lack of safe drinking water,
poverty, crime,
people dying of conflict. They are the ones who are now facing the climate catastrophe. And I live in Nairobi, and if you look at the Horn of Africa, sudden 4 years of drought, which has never happened, consecutive 4 years. 5th year, agriculture season, floods. 5 million people have been displaced. This is clearly, climate catastrophe is not something that's going to happen 30 years in future. It's happening now. So you need to take this bigger picture, and you really cannot sleep comfortably once you start looking at this picture. So, again, as I said, you would hear me. I'm not so bothered about those individuals who are running to those luxury stores. I hope God gives them wisdom, but if they don't, it's for them to fend for themselves. But how can we not make the right political and policy choices? That's the question for us.
You used the word, and I'm definitely going to dive into it. Not just politicians. I'm not going to just pinpoint on politicians globally. Yeah. We have our own fair share of politicians who are doing good. Let me start off by saying, sticking with a positive note, when it comes to actually governments implementing it, have you seen a positive story that you'd like to go ahead and share with my audience? Governments actually implementing, let's say, a specific thing on climate within Nepal or across Southeast Asia or around the world. Let me start off by climate. Any solutions that the governments have implemented that you'd like to go ahead and talk about that we could adapt?
Yeah. So there's several solutions. As in, the conversation we're doing today is not about getting angry about the immediate context that we live in. At least the perspective I have is really looking at the broader picture, the bigger picture. And in that, I must say that there are several steps being taken. For instance, I'm coming from, now just taking you back to Kanchanpur.
Sure.
And we are working. I talked of that community, which was which former bonded laborers. They have actually done a nature-based solution for ensuring embankment of a small tributary of a very polluted river. So let's hope that that's going to hold, and that's happened because of what Oxfam does, what our partner Needs does, but also because of the local municipal corporation. So those are government interventions, and you will find many of these interventions across the world. So I started from very micro. Let me take you to a slightly macro.
Sure.
Or not slightly, that's a big one. If you go back to the 60s, 70s, 50s, we were all making big dams. Really big dams, as in I'm talking of all over the world.
Sure. Yeah.
And we realized that the dams have a massive cost, an environmental cost, a human cost. And now we're looking at, you really don't see any new big dam being commissioned. In fact, in places like Canada, you are even seeing decommissioning of big dams. That's again a shift, policy shift, because you've recognized what the environmental cost of this level of intervention is. Even from a different dimension, we have just got in Dubai when the COP happened, which is the Conference of Parties for Environment, we have got a loss and damage fund. So, the money is very small, we need to do much more, but the recognition by different governments that we are responsible for the damages that communities are going through. So you create a fund. So there's several steps being undertaken. That's how I would look at it. However, the fundamental shifts are not happening. As in, you're still looking at, if I remember correctly, almost $1 trillion of subsidies to the fossil fuels. And on the one hand, you say this is responsible for climate change, and
on the other hand,
you're subsidizing them. So there are fundamental problems as well. So yeah, that's how I would look at it. There's some positives, but a huge amount of ground to cover.
Let me pick your brain on this one line: burden to developing nations.
Yeah.
There's a lot of burden to the developing nations or least developed nations who want to come out of it, who want their growth. We do need our growth. We need our roads. We need, Lord knows, I could talk about this for all day. What about the developed nations? Do they have more to go ahead and contribute on this?
Oh, absolutely. As in, totally. Good that you're asking that. I would very strongly urge that we do not lose this framing. It is 300 years, 400 years of colonialism, imperialism, racism, which has ensured the accumulation of wealth in the North. And therefore, at this moment, you need to ensure that the global South, where a significant number of poor people live, are compensated for the injustice done. So, but even in international negotiations, you have this framework which is called common but differentiated responsibility. So the North has that responsibility of ensuring that those resources flow from the North to the South. Because, just going back to the point that we discussed about carbon emissions, most of the people actually live in countries like India, Nepal, in most parts of Africa, carbon neutral life even today. Mm-hmm. So the real emissions are still happening in the North. As in this is not to say that India and China, who have now become, in aggregate numbers, serious contributors to pollution. I'm not saying that. However, but even within India, it's a small segment which is really responsible for this contribution to the carbon emissions. So absolutely bang on.
We need to have the right to develop our nations as well, so that we catch up.
Yes.
We want to catch up. We definitely want to catch up. I'm not talking about anybody else, none of our neighbors. I don't want to get into that. Obviously, our neighbors have their own muscles
Yes.
that they tend to go out and flex in the global forum. And us coming from a small nation, we do want to develop. We do want to get out of poverty. We do want to go ahead and give better roads to each and every human being who lives in this part of the planet.
And I totally agree with that. My only request to all of us would be, how do we also learn lessons from the mistakes that other nations have done? It's important to learn from history.
Have to. Even Oxfam, if I was not mistaken, World War II played a big role, if I'm not mistaken, in the inception of Oxfam.
Oh, it is. So during World War II, that's really the inception of Oxfam. And I thought it was a fascinating idea that a group of committed individuals got together at Oxford to say that irrespective of what our government says, we must ensure that food is delivered to places where people are not being able to access food. So,
Amitabh, I know I have limited time with you. 49.75% of the world, I don't know if it's your data or it's a data from somewhere we picked it up, of the world's population represents women.
yeah.
Inequality needs to be addressed. It's a big part of your mission.
It is, yes.
Economic inequality, is it increasing every year? What does the data say, and what's the future like?
In terms of gender?
Yes.
So, this is a data which I'm sure is universally accessible, but let me bring again one of our reports.
Sure,
Yes?
sure, works.
There is our inequality report in 2020 focused on the gender gap. And it's again mind-boggling. Our report highlights that $11.3 trillion. $11.3 trillion. That's
That's a lot of money.
Yeah. That would be like 4 India GDPs. Is being contributed by women to the global economy through underpaid and unpaid care work. So, just imagine, as in there stories after stories. I'm sure if you just go out, the way patriarchy works, it's the women who would wake up, and I've seen that, in across the world. Women are the ones who wake up, will ensure that they're taking care of the cattle. They will go in a place like my country, India. I've seen women walk 2 kilometers to get water. They bring the water back, ensure the children are fed. They're sent to school, and then the woman would herself go to a construction site, work, and come back. That's the reality, and this happens across. So taking care of the elderly, of the families, household, all this is being done by women. So just looking at the unpaid care work itself is now something that all of us are focusing on, and we need to fundamentally change that. And then they are getting underpaid. I'm sure you know that across the world, very often for this, even the same work, women get lower wages. It's pretty much the same work, but women would get lower wages. So I would say the picture still needs to change dramatically. There are some attempts to address it, but we are a long way off as we continue to live in a patriarchal world. And that patriarchy needs to be done away with.
Future? Changes. Oxfam is definitely working towards it within Nepal as well. What have you learned? And obviously, let me touch base on India too. And because open border, we definitely have a lot of we have a lot of things in common. Let me just put it along that line.
Yeah.
I can touch base with Bhutan as well. Let's say we have a lot in common within the 3 countries that we have. What have we learned in X amount of years? Let's say in a decade, and what are the solutions that we would actually implement, and what could we learn from?
There are solutions. What we need is the political will to implement those solutions. And very often, I must also say that, and I'm intentionally saying now, this is the political will. I'm not saying the policy choices, because politicians, policymakers are smart people. They do know the different policy options, but they often do not have the political will to implement the changes which would ensure the fruits of development, the fruits of change, ensure or reach in an equitable way to every citizen. And that's what we need to work on. It's work in progress, but we need lots and lots of work, and communities need to really start asking for more from their governments, from their politicians, from people like us who are here to serve communities.
Roles of INGOs and NGOs?
Yeah, so the roles of INGOs, NGOs, I would say that's a question I keep working on. I would say very quickly there are broadly three kinds of roles. One, just to provide charity, which is worthwhile. When you have a flood, you need pretty much everybody trying to help. The second is development, which is investing in long-term development through education, providing safe drinking water, which is, again, a worthy cause. However, the third one, which I think is the most important, is to hold power to account. Ultimately, we elect governments. There is a social contract. As citizens, as people, we give so much of our power to the governments. And I'm saying they should tax more, they should have more resources, but holding them accountable for the commitments that they make, whether in their political manifesto, their election manifesto, or just even bigger, just look at the UN Declaration of Human Rights. 75 years of UN Declaration of Human Rights, and we are completely faltering. So holding power to account is what the NGOs certainly must do. That's really the role of civil society, and I hope they can do that.
Something that over a span of, and I don't know how long have we been here, there's one word that we've been constantly talking about, and the word is called water. Yeah. We live in a planet where we are not being able to provide people with water.
Yeah.
That's the most, let me just go ahead and say it, I might be wrong in this, that's the most basic thing that everybody deserves.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're talking about it sitting here sipping water. Yes. That people do not have water in this planet.
Yeah.
Where have we reached? What have we done?
What have we done? What is the society we have created? Why have we normalized these levels of injustice and inequality? I would say that this is injustice. It's not just that we've not been able to reach them. So, my request to all of us is to fundamentally change the gaze that we have. The gaze is not about saying, oh, these are poor people. It's not about the poor people. It's looking at ourselves, what kind of systems we have created, which does not even ensure basic safe drinking water to every person. That's the question we need to ask. How can we sleep comfortably? I said this once earlier, but I really think that when you see such gross injustice all around, such levels of deprivation around the world, how can you just go on living a comfortable life? It's like I do this, and if in the evening I go to a pub and just have 3 drinks, there's something wrong with me, not with the person who's not getting water.
Let me track back on this. I don't know how much time I have with you. How did you get started in general in
life?
In life,
I started on a happy note, and I'm still happy. But I did start. It was an interesting entry for me into this world, and I would say I did grow up in privilege. And but that privilege ensured that I was constantly in touch with the real world. So thanks to my parents who were like constantly saying, come on, look at the real world. And then I was, I think, a good student of social science. And when you really get into what you're studying seriously, it helps you give that framing. So, as I said, from the family, maybe it was the heart that comes in.
Yeah.
But then when I started reading, understanding that there are larger systems which need to be changed. So it's been a journey. I've just been. You don't realize.
Yeah.
And I would really say that maybe I'm privileged that I get to work directly on this. But I'm absolutely sure there are hundreds and thousands and millions of people who would have maybe more passion than me in wanting to build a just and equal world. It is about, it's really reaching out to them, kind of reaching out to their sense of justice and saying, let's change the world.
Very beautiful, very beautifully put. And obviously, I have to go ahead and talk about the forum. How did that go? And how was it, by the way, before I forget?
Yes, the World Social Forum. It was, I would say, remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it. The energy that you saw of people from around the world, from indigenous people to women. Rights activists to young people from around the world, fewer people from Latin America, but still you had them, and then enormous number of people from Nepal, and all of them, with that level of diversity, still the idea, the dreams of building an alternative world. I think that's inspiring. You should have been there. That was not a good time to be in New York for you, but it was really inspiring that how people located in their own context, but they still have common dreams, and that inspires us. And I'm sure people would have gone back with that inspiration of trying to change their immediate realities, but also the macro picture of this world.
I'm always interested in. I'm 36. I love hanging out with and listening to very young people. Because they have the best ideas.
Yeah.
And they have ideas that they want to go ahead and implement as soon as possible. And obviously, there are some ideas you can implement right away. Some need a little bit of time, but that patience definitely runs out when it comes to young people, which I love it. I generally love it, right? I love picking in that. Did you meet the youth, and what kind of conversations did you have?
I met lots of young people. I was, in fact, the opening speaker for the Intercontinental Youth Forum, and I really enjoyed it. It started with there were lots of slogans on solidarity for Gaza. I loved it, but the conversations, I think you're right. There was this sense of impatience that we're not going to live with this. And I think sometimes you do need that impatience to say that we will change the world here and now. And that radicalism is also critical. Sometimes when things don't move, incremental change also sometimes gets stuck. That radical approach to changing the world is critical. And young people have that. They have the energy. And one conversation that we had, which I think is interesting, the recognition that the change is not going to happen in comfort.
Overnight, too.
Yeah, but also I think that it was a deeper point that it certainly will not happen overnight, but on the other hand, it will not happen living just the way we live. We will need to pay a cost for that change. So, the young people talking about courage, because when you start changing things, there's going to be a backlash. But you're not going to be timid and get scared because of the backlash. You will say that, okay, I withstand the pressure, but we will walk the path of building a more just society. And so that I thought is an important learning, and radical people have greater courage.
And great ideas. Open the box ideas are even better.
Oh, absolutely.
I tend to like that more too. When it comes to our part of the planet and Nepal itself, anything specific you'd like to go ahead and share that Oxfam's working on and thought process that you have?
So Nepal has a robust civil society. We work with the civil society, and if you see our work, we are working at multiple levels around the idea of how do you build resilient communities, how do you ensure that the impact of climate is now the communities do not suffer. We also have work on gender justice. We are working with young people. So it's a whole range.
Yeah.
But essentially, the idea is that how do you intervene with the Nepali NGOs in ensuring that people recognize and realize their own power in shaping their destinies.
Very well put. Very well put. And where are you off to next, if you don't mind me asking?
No. I'm going to Nairobi, which is kind of home for me, and I guess get a couple of weeks rest.
Good. I'm glad. Thanks for coming by, and we touched base on a lot of things. Obviously, this is actually when I get started, but I don't have a lot of your time.
No, but thank you for inviting me. It's always good to have a conversation which is relaxed, which is honest, and which is forward looking.
It has to be. It has to be always. Thank you so much for your time. And
Thank you,
next
Sanjay.
time when you visit us, I don't know whenever that is, at least if I get more time, I'd love to pick your brain more.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Sanjay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome. Perfect.